what we're going to operate on is the principle that structure determines outcome. And by that, what we mean is that our present state has a structure to it that produces the kind of outcome that we are living in. And our 10x desired state, it also has a structure that will produce those outcomes. And so part of the challenge for us and what we're looking to model is what is that? What is structure? And how does that operate in a general sense, in more abstract sense that we can then chunk down for the specific content of whatever we're in? And so having the filter, the mindset, the ability to see that structure, understand what the primary components of it are, recognizing that if we change one component, if we particularly we change the right components, we will transform that 1x structure and we can move that into a 10x outcome. When we make that move from 1x to 10x on a regular basis, we are actually producing exponential growth.
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the 10x Mindset podcast. And today is going to be something very special. Today, Gene and I are going to bring you a very old school NLP modeling. So one of the things that I've discovered that Gene is exceptional at, working with 10x. I mean, he's coached me so much and helped me so much in my life, but I've seen him work with others as well as part of different sessions and different programs. And I've recognized he's consistently able to recognize where people are at. So in our next terms, we call it the 1x structure in terms of what's really going on with them. And consistently within a session, move them to their 10x structure, which is to move them from that 1x to 10x and create that exponential growth, with that exponential shift and that change and the transformation. I've experienced that so many times, and we thought that today it would be a great idea to unpack that how does he do it? What are some of the elements that he pays attention to? What are some of the elements that he focuses on? And we're gonna also go a little bit into different components of 10x that we've already covered in the previous podcast. You can also go through them as well if you want to go deeper with them. But the intention of today's episode is, one, you can obviously learn about NLP modeling because modeling is such a great tool. But through NLP modeling, recognizing that how can you pay attention to your own 1x structures and move them or transition them or shift them generatively to the 10x structure, and how can you do that with others as well? I think it's such an amazing mindset, skill, I would say, like a capacity or a capability to be able to consistently, no matter where you go, no matter where you are at, to be able to recognize that 1x structure and to be able to recognize that 10x structure. Because once you do that, then it becomes really, in most cases, it becomes really easy for you to then transition, because big part is awareness. And creating that awareness is important. And so that's going to be our today's episode. So we're going to unpack a little bit of 10x model, but we're going to unpack that how Gene transitions people from 1x to 10x. And we're going to identify elements and components of that you can use in your life with your own goals, with your own outcomes, but also then you can use it with others if you want to do a little bit of moving people from 1x to 10x with others as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I would just kind of say as a foundational principle, if you will, very simply, is that what we're going to operate on is the principle that structure determines outcome. And by that, what we mean is that our present state has a structure to it that produces the kind of outcome that we are living in. And our 10x desired state, it also has a structure that will produce those outcomes. And so part of the challenge for us and what we're looking to model is what is structure, and how does that operate in a general sense, in more abstract sense that we can then chunk down for the specific content of whatever we're in. And this can be a personal kind of thing. It can be an organizational thing. It can be a relational thing. Whenever we encounter life, we're encountering structure, right? And so having the filter, the mindset, the ability to see that structure, understand what the primary components of it are, recognizing that If we change one component, if we particularly we change the right components, we will transform that 1x structure and we can add into a 10x outcome. When we make that move from 1x to 10x on a regular basis, we are actually producing exponential growth because it's iterative. In other words, okay, x becomes 1x, we integrate it, and we go on and say, well, how do I 10x this new state that I'm in? So that's kind of foundational to it. The other thing I would say is just as a way of illustrating the more general concept of structure is the 10x model. Foundationally to this is the whole idea of the essential self, and that is the essential self is not behavioral. It just is who we are created to be. No fear, no judgment, no negatives involved in that. The expression of our essential self we see in the beginning of that model, which is the 10x core identity. That is a pure expression of essential self, which produces best self behaviors. It also produces the 10x mindset. And there are 5 components of that, which is entering the unknown, setting our comfort zones, exercising emotional resilience, accessing resources, taking strategic risk. That's kind of the filter of the mindset that goes with 10x. Then we have the 10x tote, which is basically the set of strategies that we have for moving ourselves. It's the change strategies from moving from present state to desired state. And then out of that, generating 10x outcomes, which is the 4th component, 10x outcomes. And those outcomes are consistent with the 5 criteria of the 10x mindset, that they really challenge us to get outside of the box that we keep ourselves in and say, well, I've never thought about this before. I don't really know how to do it, but I trust that I will be able to figure it out. And with that part of the mindset operating, we will consistently be able to produce 10x outcomes. And then finally, 10x futures. And that's the collection. It's kind of like a container of all the possibilities of what we could focus on as 10x outcome. Not that we have to, and in fact, most of them we won't ever even pursue. But out of that broad range of potential outcomes, we choose which are most important to us, and that kind of gives us orientation and direction. So those 5 components work simultaneously and interactively together. And when we embody that, what we guarantee for ourselves is exponential growth. And so the model is kind of like the next level for growth in multiple areas, whether that's in personal growth or organizational growth or relational growth. It's wherever you want to apply it, really. That's kind of the foundational stuff.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Gene. I mean, for some of you who haven't gone through the previous episode, this could be, I don't know, a lot in one go to take in, but which is great because that's exactly what we're going to unpack as an experience to model that out. And I might also suggest that if you want a visual reference for this, get in touch with us and we can share it with you so you know what those components are and what those guides are. Then you have a visual reference for this. But before we step into recognizing the 1x structure and 10x structure and how do you work with that, Gene, would you like to first quickly share what is the structure? So when we say that we're paying attention to a present state structure or 1x structure and desired state structure, or 10x structure, what is that we are paying attention to? Of course, some of the things that the components that you already mentioned that we want to pay attention to, like our core identity or counterfeit identities and so on. But what is that structure and how would you define that?
Great question. So I would say as a starting place, the orienting question that I use is if somebody comes with a present state or I have my own present state and I'm going, okay, what has to be true that I'm experiencing this, or what has to be true that they're experiencing it? And it's a really deep question because it's saying that there's something that I or person I'm working with presuppose to be the case, and that often is a belief as a starting point. And by structure, one of the things that we mean is there's a pattern here that repeats itself through time. When that pattern it's addressing that pattern is really where the transformational work occurs. It's not so much if it's a one-off situation. You can still find the structure of a one-off thing, but if you find the repetition of the pattern in your life or in a client's life, then you really have, that's where the gold is. And that's what we want to find. And patterns, as I said, patterns are structures through time, and structures are conditions or elements that are in configuration with each other in relationship. And how do they all work together to produce the outcome? And one of the insights that we've developed is that core identities, which are expressions of essential self, they generate behavior which produce outcomes which are consistent with that core identity. So if you recognize somebody who's excellent at what they do, what you can guaranteed is that they have a core identity of I am excellence, and that is produced through time and across context. And then you can unpack it by getting much more granular with regard to what the actual strategies are and how you do it. But one of the things you can expect is they will produce excellence in multiple circumstances. By the same token, if somebody is insecure, for example, as a present state, and they're not just insecure in one circumstance, they're insecure in a number of not everyone maybe, but in a number of circumstances. So what is the structure of that? Well, one of the components that you want to find is what is the self-limiting belief there? So the belief might be I'm not good enough. Right. As an example that you and I've talked about, one of my clients, his dad said to him when he was 6 years old, "You're a mistake. We did not want you." And for 50 years, he gave him the same message. Unfortunately, that didn't last his entire lifetime. I mean, he did kind of change his attitude toward his son, but that was way into 5 decades worth of interactions. But what it meant was that young boy embodied that and took it as true. What has to be true in order for him to be as successful an entrepreneur as he was? Part of it was, I'm going to prove to my dad that I am worthy. And that's all in reaction to that self-limiting belief. I'm not good enough. So that's how the relationship of components begin to interact.
Okay. So if I got this right, so one of the things that you shared, that when we pay attention to our present state structure or 1x structure, whatever that might be, it often is cross context. So it's something that we might become aware of it because we're thinking about it in terms of one outcome or one challenge or something to overcome. But when we look at the structure, that structure often exists in many different
That's
areas
right.
and many different contexts.
Yeah.
Resourceful or unresourceful, it could be an identity that, resourceful, I'm a confident person, I can make anything happen. And that can show up in different places. And that's the kind of then result that I would experience in life. And I can have like, I'm not good enough, or I'm a failure, or I always screw things up. Then so it is always, so the present state is not something outcome or context specific. But one of the element of recognizing the structure that you would say is that it will be applicable cross context thing.
Yeah.
The second thing that you mentioned is that we want to identify self-limiting beliefs or self-limiting statements, identity. That's something helps us identify present state. Specifically, obviously, if you're working towards something that's not
So
working.
one way to say this is to say that when we identify outcomes that we want to change, for example, we want to change our present state. And as you were saying, when those outcomes are consistent over time, through time and across context, what we know is that the present state is actually a pattern. Present state is not a feeling. The present state it includes a feeling, includes the thought process, includes the intentions that you have, but it's not just that in the moment. It's something that runs through time and across context. And so it's the pattern that we want to pay attention to. And because when we address the pattern, so exponential growth happens when we change the pattern, not when we change the behavior. Really important principle, right? So if we change the pattern, what it means is we're going to change the outcomes through time and across context, right? And that is really, I think, powerful to think about. And particularly when you're thinking about it in terms of exponential growth, right? The more patterns we can change from dysfunctional to functional, the more functional, the more mature, the more healthy we become as people. And what we know is that as we become healthier and more functional, our energetic presence changes. And that energetic presence is one of the most powerful influences for ourselves and for others we have to bring to the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so then my next question for you would be, maybe if we can take a reference of your client or generically as well, how do you recognize these patterns when you work with people?
Oh, that's very good. It is. Now we're getting to the tough part. Well, I would say this is interesting. Think about the presupposition that I'm thinking about the presuppositions I carry. My operational presupposition in the 10X model is we all have an essential self, and that essential self is healthy, it's positive, it has abundance as part of its essence. It's full of optimism and faith and trust, all of those good, positive integrity, etc. That's my presupposition. Now, with that presupposition, it creates a core identity and a mindset, 10X mindset, that what's true of me is true of you, meaning you as a client, or you as a friend, or you as a partner, or you as a colleague. And so the filter I'm using is not a filter of judgment. It's a filter of abundance and a filter of essential self. Right. And so that then becomes the standard by which I listen to somebody, or I look at somebody, I pay attention to somebody. And I say, is there a match between what I know to be true about myself and what I presuppose to be true about you and what you're describing? And if there's a mismatch, then I go, okay, this is not true. This is actually a lie. And a lie is a source of counterfeit identity. And so what we know about that is you want to move from counterfeit identity to core identity. And yeah, so I don't know. That was pretty extended. I don't know if that's good, but it is what
That's
it is.
good. I mean, so your process that you run is that there's an underlying presupposition that we all operate from our essential self, which is healthy and fulfilled and happy and
Yes,
complete.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you're looking to match or mismatch that. Where's the difference? Where is that away from that essential self? So this could be a little sidebar, that if someone who's listening right now, because one of the things that you said is that you operate from identification. It's true for you, so it's true for others. So if someone who's listening or watching, if they want to unpack or uncover their essential self for themselves so that then they can look at the mismatch, how would someone do that?
Well, for example, I would use the whole concept of their reference experience. I would say, find multiple examples, but ideally start with one example of when you exceeded all your expectations and you were the best of the best. That is an expression of your essential self. And it also points you to a core identity, which you may not have declared, and therefore you may not have anchored in as an operational identity, but it's sitting there waiting for you to own as a core identity. And when you own that, you then begin to reinforce it over time, use it more, and produce more examples of how that's true, because core identities generate behavior, produce outcomes that are directly related to the core identity itself. So there's a self-reinforcing cycle of when you live from your core identity and your best self behavior that comes from that. They're self-reinforcing, and it strengthens it over time. And what that's doing is that's validating, it's the internal validation of your essential self, because core identities are expressions of your essential self.
Okay. So what we want to do is look at the times in our lives when we were at our best, we had in flow state experience, great outcomes, results for ourselves, and then unpack the elements of that. Who were you? Who were you when you were at your best self? And who are you when you are at your best self?
Yes,
And
that's
the more you can understand the elements of your essential self.
yeah.
So that's
That's exactly right. And I think that's a
Okay.
great way that's, for any people who are coaches or managers or leaders, it's a great way to think about how to relate to other people. And that is find reference experiences of you and your best self. For example, if you're talking about communication, your best self at communicating with another person, right? Find out who are you when you're doing that, because that is an expression of your essential self. And you then anchor that and use that internal state and presupposition when you interact with new people or more people or people who are in your orbit at the moment. So what you're doing is you're taking that resource, which is expression of your essential self, moving it according to context to a new person, a new situation, and then seeing through that. So you're seeing through your presupposition into the life of another person, into the situation, the dynamic of a small group, your team, your organization, or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, great. Brilliant. And so when you're working with someone, you identify that essential self in them,
Yes.
coming from the place of identification, and then
Yes.
notice the mismatch, which often translates into a counterfeit identity.
Yes.
Would that
Yes.
be accurate?
Yes.
So
And
would you be able to?
once you recognize, oh, that shows me a counterfeit identity, then you go, okay, what's the belief that holds the pattern of the counterfeit identity? And then you go for changing the belief. When you change the belief, you can then change the counterfeit to a core identity.
And how would you? I mean, I'm assuming that most times we can't just ask the question, "Oh, what's the belief that's?" So how do you unpack that so that that belief sort of emerges or comes out? I mean, of course,
Well,
there's another. Sometimes you
yeah,
can ask.
exactly.
Most times,
And this gets back to that core question, presuppositional question. When I look at your behavior and the outcome that you're generating, or if I apply it to myself, uh, what has to be true for that, for me or for you, to act in that way and produce that outcome? What has to be true? And so, um, for example, if somebody's angry, right? One of the things that has to be true is that there's been a violation of a value that they have. And that violation may have occurred as a young child, or it may be an in a real time violation, but that the anger is a response to that,
yeah,
and it's self protective around boundary. The other potential is that anger is often a cover for fear.
Hmm.
But it's self protective. Is so the whole idea is there's a threat when somebody's angry. There's a threat. That threat is part of the structure of their present state. And you have to go, okay, then you kind of backtrack from what is the threat here, right? And that threat could be something in the environment, another person's action or their comments or whatever. Or it could be the belief itself that the person has been carrying for years. And so that the threat is, for example, I'm afraid that I'm not worthy. Well, that kind of comes out of childhood or something like that. And so I'm going to be protective. If you threaten my sense of worthiness, I'm going to get angry and I'm going to push back on you. So that becomes part of the present state structure. And what you're saying is structure determines outcome. Outcome is anger, right? So let's backtrack into what is it that's producing anger, and is it circumstantial, or is it actually deeper at the identity level of the pattern, the belief structure, the presuppositions, etc.
yeah. All right. So this is also so one of the underlying ideas, specifically when we're working with others. So what we are stating here is that for you to start working on this with others, it's important to step into your own essential self. I mean, you
Absolutely.
don't have to probably not stay in it all the time. You might move away from it, but recognizing your own essential self is an important, because that's the way you will be able to identify that mismatch in others, identify when someone else is moving away from it.
That's right.
And so if I were to put this in steps, because we're doing modeling, and it doesn't have to be steps, but right now it seems like there's a sequence that identify your own essential self. And the way to do that would be to recognize when you are at your best self? What are the elements of it? Who are you when you're at your best self? What are your components from it? Underlying presupposition then is that everyone also has their own essential self. And for you to recognize when they're stepping away from their essential self
Right.
is to find that mismatch.
That's
And you
right.
can do that from identification.
That's right.
And that's how you can get a sense of that present state structure or a 1x structure of where people are at. And one important question to also pay attention or keep in mind is, okay, what needs to be true for someone to experience
That's
this?
right.
So when you recognize that mismatch, like in this case, you give an example of someone being angry, then you can ask the question, okay, what needs to be true for them to be angry? And then unpack that. So that allows you to get a sense, might I say, a sense of the present state or a 1x structure.
Yeah, and one of the things you're looking for when you calibrate, when you respond to somebody, you calibrate their response is, are they going, I've never seen that. They're responding out of, oh, that is true for me, right? But you're asking the question, what has to be true? And if you come to a conclusion that is not totally in alignment with their experience, you'll see it in the calibration. But when you hit it, when you really get it, it's like there's no denying. They go, I've never saw, but that's so true. I never knew that. That kind of response. When you get that, you then have created the condition to create further a 10x future for that person.
Yeah. Okay. And so then how would you transition them to 10x structures? We've identified these are a lot of elements of we've identified present state 1x structure, and this is what's happening. They're getting angry, and there's a deeper pattern. Maybe there's a deeper sort of structure of I'm not worthy. And so how would you then identify that? What is their next structure?
That's a great question. So the first thing to say is what we're operating on is structure determines outcome. We've been talking about present state structure, 1x present state structure. Now what you're asking is what is a 10x structure that we're looking for? And so the answer to that question is going to be is coming from essential self, from embodied knowing. You ask the person, and this is really, I think, an important part of the relational interactional process is you ask the other person, okay, given that you recognize now, so if we take the anger thing, that you recognize that you're angry and that's because there's been some kind of violation of value and that you don't have to be angry. What you have to do is you have to say, how am I going to stand for for my values? And then you go, and then you embodied knowing in the individual will give you a unique response from that individual. And so again, there's another presupposition, and that is that everyone has within their essential self an answer to the question of who do I want to be, need to be in this context that I'm not now being. What I'm not now being, it means I'm in present state. Who am I meant to be? Who am I capable of being? Who do I want to be? I know who that is, and I have to own it. And so it's stepping into that. It's not me as a facilitator determining it's in it. It's you as a friend, a client, a colleague, discovering it from your embodied knowing.
Hmm.
And the whole presupposition is once you clear the smoke and the fog from the circumstance, people know.
Yeah.
And so then you hold the space until they get what they know. So what is it that is unexpected, beyond your imagination? You had never thought you would be able to stand like this, do this, but you know this truth, that this is who you are, being expressed as a demonstration of your essential self through your core identities.
All right. So if we were to put this into the structure, maybe one of the questions to unpack is that who are you that you're not being?
Yeah.
Who are you? You're capable of, you know that you're capable of, but that you're not being in the context of this.
Yeah. You cannot answer that question until you've cleared the space to be accessing your embodied knowing. I mean, that's a step that if that step's not taken, you can ask the question and people have no answer to it.
Yeah.
You have to have clean access to your body knowing in order to answer the 10x question.
Yeah. Great. And then, so maybe we'll unpack then one more step. So I've recognized my present state structure. And through this question and accessing my embodied knowing, I've recognized my next desired state structure. Is that enough for me to make the transition? How do I make the transition?
At this stage, I can say with a partner or facilitator who's holding that space for you and saying yes to you, you can make it without question. Without question. I mean, that's what great practitioners are able to do, is hold that space for somebody. Getting to the place where you can do it on your own by yourself requires that you embody the model, right? The 10x model. And there are other models, not say it's the only one, but it is a model where this is possible. Exponential growth is definitely an outcome of the model. And when you've cleared the space of your present state, which is all the kind of the counterfeit identities that are operating, the internal conflicts that are operating, you clear those out. And you're able, from that clear space, to ask your embodied knowing, what is my 10x outcome? And you, as the subject, you hold your own space until you get an answer from your embodied knowing. That is a 10x response. Okay, that sets the direction, the orientation, the goal, and then you have to execute on it. And that's where, for example, the 10x tote comes in, the strategies to actually move you from where you are to where you're going. We always have that responsibility. We can understand what the outcome is, but if we don't act on it, we don't get there. So there's that sense of personal responsibility we bring to this work, which is I remove the fog, remove the smoke, get access to my embodied knowing, ask the question, get an answer, initiate, makes a commitment, initiate and execute on it.
All right, great. So I feel like, so if we were to give it, like, again, this is not the whole model, but if we were to extract the structure of it for today's episode for someone, and this I feel like is such a deep work to do. So it's like finding the time and space to do this work.
It is.
Yeah. Yes. But if we extract some parts of the structure of it, there'll be step one, to recognize your own essential self, what that is. And the way to do that would be to pay attention to times when you are at your best self. Who are you? What are the components of it? What are the elements of it? And so on. And then from there, if you're working with your own self, recognizing that where you at now, where's the gap? What's taking you away from that essential self? And that's what will elicit counterfeit identities that are not true but got developed because of upbringing or experiences, or maybe something current, whatever that is. And one of the ways to all limiting beliefs, counterfeit identities, either ways. And the way to unpack this will be that what has to be true for me to have this 1x present state experience, whatever that is, being angry or being upset or not feeling safe or not feeling worthy, not feeling good enough. What has to be true for me to experience this right now in this moment? And could we also maybe have a little more specific question in the context of just doing this as an exercise for today, that what has to be true for me that's taking me away from my essential self? That could also be a question to unpack.
I wouldn't typically ask that question because I think essential self is not behavioral. What I would do is I would look at specific outcomes and specific behaviors, or specific internal states. That's also, or internal dialogue. In other words, I would chunk down to that level, which is really a behavioral level, and say, what has to be true for that to be the case? I wouldn't, because the thing is that I make the presupposition that essential self is expressed through core identities, but that's simply language to articulate a process. Actually, having the experience is something a little bit different, and it's better to operate from the behavioral side on the experience level.
Great. So we can unpack that and explore that. That itself, I feel like, is such a deep work. to get to the place where is this coming from? And as then we do that as a next step, that what is your sort of the next desired state? And in other words, who are you? Who are you capable of being? Who are you already maybe that you're not being in this moment?
That's
That
right.
you're
And
not
that is a question. Whenever you have a clear space access to your embodied knowing, you can always ask that question, whether you have a problem or not, whether you have a success or not. You can say, who am I? In my best self, right? And that when you get an answer to that, that answer will be an expression of your essential self. And as an exercise, I would just offer people, I think is a great one. Robert Quinn is the university professor, University of Michigan, whose book, was it Building the Bridge as You Walk on It or something like that?
building the bridge.
Yeah. But the exercise is a best self exercise where you go ask, 10 people who know you and you trust to identify when they saw you, they experienced you in your best self. Right. And then for them to reflect on what is it about their experience of you in that situation that they declare about you is best self. That is kind of input that takes you out of your own kind of forest and allows you to step back and really see yourself with a very different lens from the best of the best that other people see. And now you can own for yourself.
Yeah, that's a great side quest. But it's a great exercise also to kind of have different elements of the 10x desired state for yourself. And
exactly,
that's that. So that could be part of the exercise as well that you can go ahead and do. And then once you've learned to recognize 1x present state, once you learn to recognize 1x desired state, then it's the bridge or building that bridge.
Building the bridge as you walk on it. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so good. Thank you so much. This is fantastic, Nishith. I really have enjoyed this.
Thank you. I mean, this is such a great way to unpack how you work with people as you work with them through 10x model. But I'm sure it's not just 10x model, but just working with people to have them experience that exponential growth and to have, like I said, obviously there's so much more to this, but this itself feels like such a deep structure for everyone to experience and for everyone to go through. I would definitely be very, very curious as you go through the main quest of this structure and the side quest of maybe asking 10 people for you when you're at your best self. I'd love to hear what emerges out of all of this for you. In
Me
both
too.
contexts, I think working with self as well as working with others, because this is such a great way to just in terms of simple exercise of seeing your team at your essential self, at their best self, makes such a huge difference. And then you can identify the gap between 1x and 10x and create exponential growth. So it's such a great gift to give to others as well. So however you use it and however you apply it, but would definitely love to know your experience of it.
Yeah, me too. Sounds great.
Great. Brilliant. So as usual, share your thoughts, share your experiences, what happens, and hope you enjoyed the episode. And till we see you next time, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.